Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 120, Sleepmaxxing, Broke the Limit. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist, sleep specialist, and your host for this episode of the podcast. It is the first Monday of October for the podcast. So we are doing Insomnia Monday, and glad you're here. If you're new to the Sleep Unplugged podcast, welcome. If you're a veteran, welcome back. So, as I mentioned, we always take the first Monday of each month and dedicate it to a topic related to insomnia. And I thought sleepmaxxing would really lend itself nicely to that topic. So I'm glad you're here for it. If you want to get in touch with the show, you have an idea for the show, a comment on a previous episode, a question, a criticism, a compliment, you can reach us at Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter. We have a YouTube page where we post video content of all of our podcasts. We also have the Spotify Sleep Unplugged podcast music playlist where we post the music that we talk about in all of our episodes. We always start our episodes off with comments, corrections, criticisms. We've got two this week. The first is a compliment. This is from Amethyst. I was having sleep problems, very serious ones, and I want to thank you for your book, The Sleep Solution, because I'm sleeping like a child. As a kid and a young adult, I used to dream a lot and remember all my dreams. But with time and stress, that was something I was losing until I read your book and started to sleep good. I am so grateful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's right, 3 thank yous. Well, thank you for taking the time to reach out to the show. I'm glad the book is helpful. I'm glad the podcast is helpful. It's all meant to be helpful. The second one was our listener who wrote, and I'm sure she's writing about we did an episode recently about the Apple Watch detecting sleep apnea. That was 2 episodes ago, episode 118. And she wrote, "Hello, can you recommend a good at-home sleep test for sleep apnea?" And the answer is no, because that's not something that typically you're going to arrange as a layperson. This is definitely something that you would want to do through your primary care doctor, through a sleep clinician, maybe even through a dentist or other medical provider. There are certainly ways that those tests can be done and administered. We do home sleep testing through our clinic all the time. So there is a way to do it, but this is probably not something that I would recommend that you do, because if you do find that you have sleep apnea, generally speaking, you're going to need some sort of medical test to give to your insurance company to move forward with the treatment of your sleep apnea. So I appreciate that. I think that's a fantastic question. So the topic this week, sleepmaxxing, the title of our podcast, Broke the Limit, is actually from the AC/DC song Thunderstruck, from their 1990 album, The Razor's Edge, or it might be just be Razor's Edge. And that was really the AC/DC album that brought them back. They had Back in Black, which I believe was 1980. They had lost their lead singer, Bon Scott, and were kind of in disarray. And this was their big comeback album. And after that, they were kind of quiet. I think For Those About to Rock. No, that wasn't after that. That was before. So Back in Black came out in 80. They had a string of a bunch of albums that were not so great. Rolling Stone gave Back in Black 5 stars. Then they actually made an album, I believe in 86, called Who Made Who? And it was actually an album of older songs and a couple original musicals, lyricless songs, but they also had the song Who Made Who on there. And it was all the soundtrack to Stephen King's book they made into a movie called Maximum Overdrive. So I thought this would be we could put on Thunderstruck on the Spotify playlist because Broke the Limits in the title. But because we're talking about sleepmaxxing and the title of the movie soundtrack was Maximum Overdrive, I'm putting Who Made Who on the Sleep Unplugged Spotify musical playlist too, because I love that song. And Razor's Edge was an interesting album. When it came out, it got kind of panned by critics. I think Rolling Stone gave it 2 stars, but it really created a resurgence for AC/DC. And I think even to this day, if you go to a AC/DC concert, whatever album they're promoting, take away those songs. Generally speaking, the only songs after Back in Black that they play, I think there's only three or four. Two of them, uh, the what do you Money Talks and Thunderstruck are the only two of the songs they actually play that are kind of a modern AC/DC song. Love the AC/DC album and their logo. It was designed by a guy named George Huerta, who actually designed Boston's logo, Foreigner's logo, People Magazine logo, and the Rolling Rock beer logo. Actually was on a some museum arranged for him to give a lecture, and you could log in online and listen to him talk, and he was actually really, really fascinating. And Razor's Edge was actually the only AC/DC studio album that featured the drummer Chris Slade, who was the drummer for the one of my favorite super groups, The Firm, which was Paul Rogers from Bad Company, Jimmy Page, and Chris Slade was the drummer for that. So if you want a good firm song, Satisfaction Guaranteed has always been one of my favorites. So, all right, we're moving on. We're 6.5 minutes in. We're moving on to the meat and potatoes of this podcast, which is Sleepmaxxing. Somebody sent me this article from the New York Times. You can look it up yourself, September 8th, from Kate Lindsay. She is the author. I don't trust people who have two first names. Their name consists of two first names, so I'm suspect of Kate Lindsay. I'm kidding. But her September 8th article was titled "How the Pursuit of Perfect Sleep Can Backfire." And the gist of the article was about sleep maxers, people who are trying to take enormously complicated steps to try to achieve sleep perfection. And it's a big thing within the Gen Z sort of generation, that the idea of my generation, you sleep when you're dead. There's nothing that, a little caffeine in the morning can't fix. This is the attitude that I encounter when I work with sports teams. And speaking of sports teams, very excited. So many of my baseball organizations that I work with have gotten into the playoffs. So wishing them all the best. The Padres just had a big win to move on. They'll play the Dodgers, with whom I work. Looking excited about Cleveland. There's a lot of sleep forward teams that are in the mix. So we're pulling for you guys. So, but when I work with these teams, one of the attitudes that we run up against is, do we really need to focus on sleep? The first person to the training center, the last one to leave is the best, the one that the manager is most excited about. I mean, I think that attitude is absolutely changing. And as a younger generation get in there, they're suddenly making it cool to prioritize sleep. So, from that perspective, this movement's great. We're giving sleep attention, and we're making it okay to talk about prioritizing sleep, which I think is fantastic. So when you look at a lot of the social media that Sleepmaxxing is built upon, it's some random individual who's waking up and filming himself or their self, pulling off their mouth tape, taking the dilators out of their nose, taking the strap that holds their chin in place off, pulling out the noise canceling headphones, taking off the cooling mask that has white noise built into it. And they call this the morning shed, that all of this contraption technology, devices that they're using to push the envelope to greater sleep, they take it off and then they tell you how amazing they feel, which is really funny because there are several videos where what's coming out of their mouth does not necessarily reflect what the video looks like. I'm going to tell you right now, if you listen to this podcast, I am not a morning person. My chronotype is to some degree delayed, getting less delayed as I age, but it is definitely getting delayed. but it's definitely delayed. I don't feel great in the morning. I am much more of a night person. A lot of these people seem like night people because they're like, oh my God, I've gotten the greatest night of sleep ever as they're pulling adhesive off their, lips and whatnot. So I think that this deserves some attention. And you're asking the question, okay, Chris, well, this is a great topic, but why are we doing it on Insomnia Monday? I'm having trouble falling asleep. How does sleep maxing impact this aspect of what I've come to your podcast for? I think it impacts it greatly because I think of everything on a spectrum. I think that we are always looking to be in the middle of the sleep spectrum. I don't want the 1978 baseball manager attitude of you sleep when you're dead. As long as I get 3 hours of sleep, I'm fine. If you listen to this podcast, we have a name for that person. It's Jenny Trauma Surgeon. Jenny Trauma Surgeon says, Chris, I hear what you're saying, but as long as I get 3 hours of sleep, I'm fine. In fact, I was just giving a lecture up in Philly last week, and I made the joke that I'm going to talk to you about alcohol. And I'm going to talk to you about getting a little, too little sleep. And I guarantee you, one of you after this lecture out here in this big audience of people will come up to me and say, oh, Chris, that was a great lecture. I really appreciate it. That was so much fun. You really brought sleep to life. I hear what you're saying about alcohol and getting enough sleep. But for me, drinking a six pack and as long as I get 4 hours of sleep, I'm good. No, you're not. So let's think about that person. If we think about the spectrum, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, I want everybody in the green zone. That's where I want you to be. I consider that person to be in the red zone. They are getting inadequate sleep. They are using substances to create sedation or whatever. So those are the individuals in the red zone that need to prioritize sleep more. And I think sleep maxing, having those videos go to the red zone person's phone are great. I like the idea of that person getting bombarded day after day with random people who are not sleep experts telling them how great they feel. Peel off the mouth tape, pull out the dilators, take off the sleep mask, remove the weighted blanket, take the cooling pad off. And there's telling you, oh my gosh, I was somebody who didn't prioritize sleep. Now I do. I feel great. Swipe, another person saying the same thing. Swipe, another person. I've always felt there is a massive population of people that do not want to hear from doctors. I would go a step further. I don't think they want to hear from experts. I think there's a lot of people who would say, well, yeah, Chris has a horse in this race, right? He wants you to prioritize sleep because if you prioritize sleep, somehow that makes him money. And then the money buys him fancy cars and beach property. No, that's not exactly all what's happening. But I think people believe that. I mean, I think there's a real death of expertise, right? But if the general population is telling you something almost conspiratorially, like, the world doesn't want you to get enough sleep, but if you do get enough sleep, you're going to feel amazing. You'll run faster and you'll be better at your job and you'll attract more people that you want to date, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a big population of people listen to that. So if we can pull those people from the red zone into maybe the orange zone, maybe even the yellow zone, ideally the green zone, that is awesome. And I think sleep maxing could really be a tool for doing that. What about the people in the blue zone? And I don't mean the blue zone about eating Mediterranean diet and having a glass of red wine with your freshly pulled oysters from the Mediterranean. I'm talking about my sleep spectrum of red zone people not valuing sleep enough, purple zone people putting way too much emphasis on it. And it's interesting because in this New York Times article, Lindsay talks about Matt Walker and his book, Why We Sleep. Fantastic book. Listen, you can pick any book apart. I think it's a great book for the same reasons we're talking about this. It is giving a voice to how dumb it is to not prioritize sleep. It's not smart to not prioritize hydration, not prioritize good eating. To not prioritize sleep is just stupid. And when you get finished with Matt's book, I think it would be very difficult to say, yeah, I'm still not going to get enough sleep. I think that's a good idea. But the problem with Matt's book, and what I always, communicate with Matt when I have the opportunity to do so, is your book has filled my clinic with patients, right? Because there are people who read that book and have a bit of the purple response to it. The red response is, all right, well, he's presented a lot of evidence here. I guess I probably need to start thinking about getting more sleep if I want to lead a healthy life. Maybe this is why my blood pressure is high. Maybe this is why I struggle so much with my weight or my mood. Now, he lays that out there. It's a treatise, right? But if you're somebody who's already sleeping okay or a lot or struggling with their sleep and you read that book, I don't think the threat of dementia is helping you any. So there's a spectrum there. And that was really the premise of my book. Like, let's just relax a little bit about sleep. Let's poke some fun at sleep. Let's have a good time with this. Yes, let's prioritize it, but let's not go overboard here. Right. So to me, that's what we're talking about. And now with Sleepmaxxing, if you're somebody who's tuned into this podcast because you have trouble with insomnia, I don't think the Sleepmaxxing trend is for you at all. In fact, if you go way, way back to what was it? I think episode 5, where we did trendy sleep topics. One of those trendy sleep topics was orthosomnia, coined by Kelly Barron and a bunch of doctors at Rush University back in 2017, that orthosomnia is that pursuit of perfect sleep. And sometimes if we get sleep trackers involved that give us sleep scores and smiley faces or frowny faces, that purple and blue population of people who worry too much about sleep, you are sending them over the edge. Every night is like a pop quiz. Every night is like an exam on your sleep. You're going to bed, oh my God, I hope I get smiley face because I've got a lot going on tomorrow and I cannot afford to not get smiley face, at least a 90% score on my tracker. And Kate talks about these people in the article, that for every person who is sort of buoyed and helped by the Sleepmaxxing, there is a population of people who are being hurt by this. That the overemphasis on sleep, especially in a group that's already doing pretty well, is not helpful. This idea that everyone can radically improve their quality of sleep is simply not true. In fact, I kind of had a little bit of a friendly disagreement on Twitter, which I love. I love sort of a nice academic conversation. And it started with somebody basically saying, there's some guy with way too much money. His name is Brian Johnson, and he's decided he's going to live to be 200. And he's invested, I think, millions of, I don't know much about him, but he's invested millions of dollars to hack his body and live a superhuman life. And so the comment that caught my attention was somebody saying, I would bet the mortgage of my house this guy's living to 200 years. And I wrote back, and I'll take that bet and let me know when I can move into that house because he's not living to be 200. What on earth, looking at population data right now and the research that he has access to, he's not doing his own research really. He's just accessing research that's already available there. We know this, right? Have you looked at cancer rates lately? Have you looked at dementia rates lately? And guess what? There are still city buses out there just waiting to take you out when you accidentally step in front of them. I mean, shit happens, right? So the idea that one specific individual, not just there will be somebody who lives to be 200 within the next few years. No, no, no. This guy is going to live to be 200. No, it's not happening. But he is part of a big biohacking, sleep hacking, longevity hacking movement that is, and at some point, this guy sent me some article. He's like, well, here you go. Here's the article that proves it. I'm like, number one, this isn't an article. This is a blog. And number two, somebody just drew some graphs. That doesn't mean anything to me. Again, I would love to see that. But as I look where we have been and where we're going, I made the comment, I said, history is probably the best indicator of longevity. So I think we've come a long way, but we're kind of tapering off, I think, a little bit in terms of average longevity. In fact, if you look over the last few years within more affluent populations, there hasn't been a whole lot of gains there. Not gains that would make me think we're going to be seeing a lot of healthy 200-year-olds running around here anytime soon. It's to me like sprinting or golf. Like there's some really good golf players out there, but when I watch golf, I think there's just way too many variables to really make that kind of prediction that somebody is going to do that well. That's why Tiger Woods was such a phenomenon. I'm still kind of in awe of all that. I'm not a huge sports fan, but with all those crazy variables, the wind and this and that, like this guy still kind of dominated for a period of time. So to me, it's like investing a whole lot of money to try to cut golf scores in half. They kind of did this with marathon running. There was this whole movement to try to get this guy optimized to run a sub 3 hour marathon, and he's close. But when you look, you remember the Olympics came around, they were looking at sprint, 100-meter sprint times over the last, I don't know, several decades. They're not exponentially getting better, they're fractionally getting better. And I think when you think about sleep maxing and the dilators and the mouth tape and the headbands and the earplugs and the noise machines and the bed coolers and the $5,000 mattresses and the whatever, I don't know that the average individual who's already prioritized sleep, you're in the green zone. I'm not sure how much moving to purple zone helps you. There is a theoretical limit here in terms of how well we can sleep. And again, I'm not arguing that you can't do it better. I just look at, the spread of a swim meet or the Olympic 400 meters. Yes, somebody wins, but the person who comes in last is still right there. Do you know what I mean? Still right there. So I think that sleep maxing is fine. I think that when we think about it, we have to just be very careful. And one of the things, one of the sentences from that article I was struck by was this one. And I'm quoting Kate Lindsay's article. Bragging about early bedtimes has become as much of a social media flex as documenting a lavish vacation. So, what have we talked about on this podcast about early bedtimes? You're struggling with insomnia. We all know what that means on this podcast. If you listen to my previous episodes, it's not an inability to sleep, it's that the sleep timing that you anticipate is not happening. So, you've been going to bed at around 10 o'clock, and it takes you about an hour to fall asleep. My my suggestion would be if it always takes you an hour to fall asleep, go to bed at 11 and don't worry about it. That's perfectly fine. That's what your body's telling you to do. Bragging about early bedtimes has become as much of a social media flex as documenting a lavish vacation. Hey, fellow sleep maxers. Hey, Instagram community. I went to bed last night after Jeopardy at 7:30 and I got the best night of sleep ever. I killed it at work. Look how great I look. I was doing terribly 6 weeks ago. Now I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock and crushing it. Bye. And then that's the thing. And somebody thinks, oh, I wish I looked like her. I wish I was as successful as she is. You know what? Screw the 10 o'clock bedtime. I'm going to bed at 8. That is not going to help a patient with insomnia fall asleep faster. You're setting yourself up to fail. The sleep maxing is the problem. That's the logical solution. I'm struggling to fall asleep at 9, sleeping terribly. I got an idea. I'll go to bed at 8. Not a great idea. Not a great idea. There was a wonderful quotation from that article from a Harvard doctor, Dr. Pavlova. And she said something I think is really profound. She said, sleep is a passive process. It's to be protected, not maximized. I'm clapping for you, Dr. Pavlova. I'm always jealous when somebody has a sentence that encapsulates something that would probably take me 5 minutes of speaking to come up with. That should be on a t-shirt. That's what we're looking for. Sleep protection, not sleep maximizing. I think that is so important. And the greatest part about the whole article is you finally get to the end of it. I'm not making this up. Search it up online. I was looking at it on my phone. Maybe it looks different on a desktop. But if you look at it, look up New York Times on your phone, pull up this article, how the pursuit of sleep can backfire. When it's all done, it says, tired of tossing and turning? There are some strategies you could try to maximize your hours in bed. What? It's like you've made this argument, Kate, and then you get to the end of it and you go right back into the, hey, are you struggling with your sleep? Here are some ideas to get more time in bed, which is probably not what a lot of those readers need. And the really funny thing, it gets better. The really funny thing is the next article underneath that sentence, there's a whole bunch of New York Times articles. So they're advertising their own articles. And that's okay. We do this all the time on the show. Like, hey, want to hear more about orthosomnia? Episode 5. Want to talk about Apple Watches and sleep apnea? We talked about episode 118. Like, sure, that's fine. But the great thing is the very first article that talks about, what you could do if you want to try to maximize your hours in bed, when you click on it, takes you right back to the Sleepmaxxing article so you can read it all over again and get nervous all over again about trying to maximize your sleep. So here's the deal. If you are listening to this podcast and you are somebody who does not believe sleep is that important, you routinely are getting 3 to 4 hours of sleep and trying to hobble through your life, I think you should pay attention to this and try to move your sleep in a more maximal direction. If you're somebody who's already sleeping fairly well, or if you're somebody who is struggling to sleep the amount of time that you spend in bed, meaning you're going to bed at 9 and you have your alarm clock set for 7, that's 10 hours. You struggle to fall asleep, you struggle to stay asleep. I don't think maxing is for you. In fact, I think your body is telling you to start minimizing the amount of time that you're spending in bed because it simply cannot create sleep to fill that opportunity. So that's it. Sleepmaxxing. We are done and dusted. We've talked about AC/DC. We've talked about Matt. We've talked about Kate Lindsay. And we've talked about Dr. Pavlova. And I really appreciate you being here for it. If you have questions, comments, corrections, criticisms about Sleepmaxxing, let us know. Dr. Chris Winter at Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram. Love it, love it, love it when you all leave reviews of the podcast. Really appreciate those. So if you have time to do that, would be really great. Get in touch with us. Let me know what you think about the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out. And until next week, sleep well.